All right, let's get right into today's explainer. We're tackling something that touches literally every part of our world, from global politics right down to our everyday economy. We're looking at one of the most consistently lucrative industries on the planet, the insanely profitable business of war. We're going to follow the money, step by step, and see exactly how this massive economic engine works behind the scenes. So here is our roadmap. We're going to break down the sheer $2.4 trillion scale of this industry, trace its roots to the military-industrial complex, map out the actual business cycle of war, and check out the revolving door that keeps it all spinning. Then we'll impartially look at the nuance of deterrence before asking a really tough question about profit versus peace. Okay, Section 1, the $2.4 trillion industry. Let's look at the sheer scale of this thing. $2.4 trillion. Let that sink in for a second. In 2024 alone, global military spending hit that record-breaking peak. It is literally the highest amount of money ever spent on defense in human history. And if we break that down, the U.S. alone is pouring over $800 billion into its military. To put that in perspective, the U.S. spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. No joke.
Actually, to really wrap our heads around how massive that figure is, if the world's combined defense budgets teamed up and formed their own independent country, it would have the 10th largest economy on planet Earth. It would sit right above the entire gross domestic product of Canada. So we aren't just talking about a little sector of the economy here, we're talking about an industry the size of a massive, fully industrialized nation.
Section 2, the military-industrial complex. How did we actually get here?
Well, you have to look back to when war shifted from kings collecting taxes to the mass production of the Industrial Revolution and World War II. During the Second World War, the U.S. government spent billions funding private companies to build planes, tanks, and weapons. But when the war ended, those companies didn't just pack up and go home. They kept growing. This actually led former General and President Dwight D. Eisenhower to issue a pretty famous warning. He cautioned us against the rise of a military-industrial complex. He basically feared that if war ever became too profitable, this complex could completely shape our politics, our economy, and our society. And honestly, it's a warning that perfectly sets up our modern reality. To see Eisenhower's warning in action today, just look at this number. $1.7 trillion. That is the expected lifetime cost of just one single program, the F-35 fighter jet. It's the most expensive weapons program ever built, period. And what's absolutely wild is that despite this unimaginable price tag, the plane still has mechanical problems 2 decades after it was initially designed. Once again, you need a comparison to really grasp the scale here. The lifetime cost of this one single fighter jet program is roughly equivalent to the entire gross domestic product of Australia. Just think about that. One plane program equals the economic output of an entire continent. And of course, it's not just the equipment. It's the conflicts themselves. The Iraq War, that cost U.S. taxpayers an estimated $2 trillion. And remember, that $2 trillion is just the baseline. It doesn't even factor in the interest on the national debt used to fund it, and it doesn't include the essential long-term medical care for the veterans who fought there.
Which naturally leads us to Section 3, the business cycle of war. Let's look at this endless loop. With trillions of dollars flying around, you gotta ask, who exactly is cashing these checks? Well, the exact same names consistently pop up. We call them the Big Five: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and General Dynamics. Together, these corporations are worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And their valuation is completely fueled by a business model that just feeds itself over and over again.
Let's walk through how this endless loop actually plays out. Step 1. Governments set massive defense budgets in the name of security. Step 2. That money flows directly to private companies to build jets, tanks, and weapons. Step 3. If a conflict breaks out, all that equipment gets used or destroyed, which instantly multiplies demand and creates new government contracts. And finally, Step 4. When the fighting stops, the rebuilding begins. To put it neutrally, companies like Halliburton and KBR earned billions in contracts rebuilding the exact same Iraqi infrastructure that their own industry's weapons had just destroyed. And then, the cycle resets right back to Step 1. And you know, this cycle happens on a micro level too. Just outfitting a single soldier costs hundreds of thousands of dollars for private company gear, stuff like night vision and satellite comms. But look at the hidden everyday costs. The Pentagon famously overpays for basic hardware store items. We're talking spending hundreds of dollars for simple hammers. Yes, literally hammers, plus coffee makers and regular screws. Why does this happen?
Well, when your client is the government and your budgets are measured in billions, those details easily just get lost in the paperwork.
Section 4. The revolving door effect. Let's talk about the systemic glue.
So what keeps this massive machine locked in place no matter who's in office? It comes down to a fascinating concept called regulatory capture. The big five defense companies spend millions funding think tanks and hiring lobbyists to influence defense policy. But it goes way deeper than that. They fill their corporate boards with retired generals and former Pentagon officials. In return, their corporate executives often move directly into government roles where they actively decide how the defense budget gets spent. This constant revolving door totally blurs the line between the government regulators and the private corporations they're supposed to be keeping in check.
And that creates a massive political trap. Think about it. Even if a politician actively wanted to reduce defense spending, they're completely boxed in. Millions of everyday jobs are tied to this military-industrial chain. Slashing the defense budget would mean massive layoffs, local economic instability, and severe political backlash from voters. It proves Eisenhower's warning perfectly. The system is just too deeply embedded in the economy to stop now.
Section 5. The nuance of deterrence. Let's look at peace and technology.
Now, to look at this impartially, the source material points out that this system isn't entirely black and white. There's some real nuance here when it comes to peace and technology. For instance, look at our everyday tech. The internet started as a military communication experiment. GPS was initially designed to guide missiles. Drones were military tools way before they were camera platforms. And a ton of modern artificial intelligence comes straight out of defense research. A massive chunk of the peaceful tech we use every single day was born directly from this war economy. Plus, there's the overarching strategy of deterrence. Politicians across the spectrum largely agree on this. The logic is that mutually assured destruction, specifically the horrific reality of nuclear weapons, has made the cost of going to war simply too high. Because of this deterrence effect, major world powers have been prevented from fighting each other directly for nearly 80 years. Statistically speaking, the modern world is more peaceful right now than at almost any other point in recorded history.
Finally, Section 6. Profit over peace. The ultimate question. We have to analyze the uncomfortable reality of living under a global economic system that inherently rewards whatever generates the highest financial return. Just look at the market's reaction to global events. It tells a very clear story. When the 2022 Russia-Ukraine invasion began, the stock prices of the world's biggest defense companies jumped 20 to 30% within just weeks. Investors know the math. Conflicts bring new contracts, which brings massive profit. On the flip side, history shows that when wars end, stock prices for these defense companies actually tend to drop. For most of the world, war means tragedy, but for this specific industry, it means business is booming.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought from our source material. We've seen how deeply embedded this $2.4 trillion industry is in our tech, our jobs, and even our global stability. So the ultimate question isn't just whether the business of war is right or wrong, but rather, are we okay living in a world that needs war to function? It's definitely a heavy question to ponder, but understanding the machinery behind it is the first step. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.